The last lecture, number 12 for Unit 3, chapters 20 and 21, we're going to talk about a few homeostatic imbalances of the immune system. So some imbalances are called immunodeficiencies, and these are conditions where your immune system, at least in part, is deficient. Okay, and then there are two major types. Congenital, that means you're born with it. Congenital immunodeficiencies, those are usually genetic defects that leave you without one or more components of your immune system. And then others are acquired immunodeficiencies. And the main one you guys will encounter is called acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, which is caused by the HIV virus. And incidentally, the way that HIV causes AIDS is AIDS kills helper T cells. That's the main way it winds up crippling your immune system. And I know we didn't really talk about helper T cell function here in Biology 202, but you will hear about it when you take microbiology. So those are immunodeficiencies. Now, autoimmune diseases, and these are actually an increasing problem in the United States as well as other developed countries around the world. This is where auto means self in biology most of the time. So an autoimmune disease is where your immune system is attacking you in some way. You know, you are attacking one or more of your own antigens. So you might, in a lot of cases, you make autoantibodies. Those are antibodies that attack, one of your own antigens. Or the TC cells here, that should be T with the lowercase c, those are cytotoxic T cells. In some cases, you may generate cytotoxic T cells that destroy your own body tissues even when they're not supposed to. So we learned that cytotoxic T cells are supposed to hunt for your cells that have very specific viruses or bacteria inside them. Well, sometimes you can wind up generating cytotoxic T cells that destroy healthy cells in the body, healthy tissues. Many different examples of autoimmune diseases, and some of these you've learned about before, such as the Graves' disease. We talked about that during endocrine. That's a autoimmune disease of the thyroid, where you make antibodies that attach to the follicular cells in your thyroid, and they mimic thyroid stimulating hormone and cause those cells to overproduce T3 and T4 hormones. Type 1 diabetes mellitus. In that case, you make cytotoxic T cells that destroy the beta cells in the pancreas that make insulin, and so you can no longer make your own insulin. Lupus, the official clinical name for that is systemic lupus erythematosus, or SLE. Erythematosus refers to a reddening that occurs in the skin and patches in patients who have this, and they make antibodies to a number of different antigens within their own bodies, and including their own DNA. People with lupus actually make antibodies that attach to their own DNA, believe it or not. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease where you wind up attacking the myelin that coats the axons of your neurons. Myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disease where you make antibodies that attach to the acetylcholine receptors on your skeletal muscle fibers, so it winds up disrupting signaling between motor neurons and your skeletal muscle fibers. It disrupts that communication that you learned about when you took Biology 201. So lots of different versions of those, and they're actually increasing in number in the United States. So you're going to wind up encountering quite a few patients who have autoimmune diseases, even if you don't already know people who do. Hypersensitivities are overactive or inappropriate immune responses. Hyper and generally inappropriate. The allergies that we're all familiar with are a type of hypersensitivity. There's more than one type. You'll learn more about those when you take microbiology as well. Some are mild, some are much more serious. Some of them can cause some pretty serious tissue damage. Some Hypersensitivities are caused by antibodies, and that includes the typical allergies that we experience to things like pollen grains and dust mites and pet dander, things like that. You wind up making antibodies that provoke pretty serious overreactions that aren't actually helping you. They're harming you more so than helping you. And then in other cases, there are some hypersensitivities that are actually caused by cytotoxic T cells that wind up torpedoing or killing some of your own cells and tissues. An example of that is the poison ivy allergy. When you experience poison ivy, there's an oil in the poison ivy plant that winds up coating your skin cells, and then you have these cytotoxic T cells, if you're allergic to poison ivy, that come in and start attacking your own skin cells because they're recognizing that poison ivy oil. So that's a type of hypersensitivity as well. Sometimes allergens are antigens that trigger allergies. Sometimes this can happen all across the whole body at one time, and that can lead to what's called anaphylactic shock. Now, we talked about circulatory shock at the end of chapter 19, and it's kind of a similar type of thing, and we talked a little bit about this before. Allergens can provoke inflammation. That's why you experience an allergy. So when you are sneezing and coughing and have a runny nose due to pollen in the spring, it's because you're having localized inflammation. It's being stimulated by whatever it is that's triggering the allergy. In the case of anaphylactic shock, this occurs when you're allergic to something like peanuts, or if you have a severe allergy to bee venom or wasp venom, something like that. And that allergen that's provoking the allergic reaction has spread all across your whole body, and that winds up stimulating, one of the things that gets stimulated with inflammation is vasodilation. And so that sudden vasodilation and the fluid loss and so forth from the bloodstream that occurs leads you to develop severe hypotension. So you go into shock, like we talked about at the end of chapter 19. And if it's severe enough, that cuts off your blood pressure. Does what? Your blood pressure is down because you're hypotensive. You're not circulating blood. You're not circulating oxygen and nutrients properly to your tissues, and that can result in death. Also, it triggers constriction of your bronchioles. Those are the small air passages in the lungs that are bringing air to local areas of the lungs for gas exchange with the blood in your pulmonary capillaries. And so inflammation actually triggers those air passages to constrict, and that's supposed to be beneficial for you, because if you did have a microbe or something invading your respiratory system, that's going to help prevent it from getting super down deep in the lungs where it might really cause you a lot of problems. But in the case when you're going into anaphylactic shock, this can be occurring in both lungs at the same time everywhere, and it can prevent you from breathing, which is another thing that may wind up killing you. This is what occurs in people who have severe cases of asthma as well. Good old epinephrine, epi. You guys know that people who have are in danger of going into anaphylactic shock because they have some kind of allergy will carry EpiPens with them, and that's the same epinephrine that our body manufactures naturally. But if you guys remember, one of the major things that epinephrine triggers is vasoconstriction. Right, so if somebody is going into anaphylactic shock, you give them epinephrine, it very quickly triggers blood vessels to dilate. And what's that going to do to your blood pressure? Yes, you're an expert at blood pressure now. That's going to increase your blood pressure because you have increased your peripheral resistance, and so that's going to help somebody survive one of these anaphylactic shock situations. What else do you know about somebody in anaphylactic shock? They look red everywhere. They look flushed because of all that widespread vasodilation across the whole body at one time. And just keep in mind, that means peripheral resistance has gone way down all across the body at the same time, and that is going to dramatically lower blood pressure lowered. All right, I know you're crushed, but we're finished with Unit 3, so that will conclude our discussions on blood vessels and the lymphatic system and the immune system. Check Blackboard for all the details on what will be on each of your 2 tests for this particular unit. And please let me know if you have any questions. Post them on Piazza so everybody can benefit from your questions and the discussion.